Welcome back to the Metro on 1019 WDET FM, Detroit Public Radio. I'm Tia Graham. Movement is a time for joy and celebration. Those things come together through music and through dancing. Dance is more than just moving, though. It's an expression. It can both ground people in their bodies and open them to new possibilities. To honor Detroit's Movement Festival, we went back into the WDET archive to a conversation that we had that celebrates dance. Last year, Ryan Patrick Cooper spoke with Emma Warren. She's the author of Dance Your Way Home, which explores the importance of dance in the techno music scene. Here was their conversation.
On a very simple level, when we dance together, we like each other more. Moving together to music is a joyful thing to do. It's a really normal and human thing to do. And it's good for us in many ways. I like the way that when you described the book at the beginning, you said, you described it as it's a book about the way the dance floor moves us. And I think that's the case. So I think probably everyone's had a little bit of that experience, even if it's when they're really young or at a wedding disco or something. But I feel like we need more of it in our lives.
When you say it helps us like each other more, you're making the case that it's a literal level playing field, that some of our differences aren't so obvious when the music is pulsating, when we can feel the bass in our bodies. And we're not necessarily talking about things, but we're just being human, we're moving. So talk to me a little bit about the power of that.
I mean, I ended up thinking that the dance floor is a technology of togetherness. And in a way that reminds me of some of the Detroit techno originators who just, the word techno comes from the word technology. And this is what I remember people saying at the time when we first started listening to Detroit techno in the late 80s and early 90s in the UK. And I think it is a technology of togetherness. And there is some good evidence to show that's the case. I found some lovely research about children, and it showed that when children move in synchrony with each other, swinging their arms or stepping side to side, they rate each other more highly afterwards. They like each other more. And there's a fair bit of evidence that shows that. And I think what is true for our young ones is also true for everybody else. That somehow moving together bonds us. It makes us feel warmer towards each other. And in that way, it can strip away some of the divides that society can place upon us. And that's certainly been true on some of the dance halls that I've been on. And I'm also very aware of it at the moment where I am. I'm calling from Northern Ireland. And I've been talking to lots of people about raves in Northern Ireland kind of back in the day. And lots of people have told me that the dance floor in this situation where things were so separated was also a technology of togetherness.
That's definitely a powerful thing. One idea in your book, again, rooting this in Detroit and the culture that we have here, because we certainly love talking about ourselves and our influence on the rest of the world here in Detroit. Techno makes the world go round, as one Ghostly International t-shirt once said. But talk to me about that music first arriving over in the UK, because that was a powerful thing and really influential in the dance clubs and the dance scene that was happening in your neck of the woods.
Absolutely. I mean, I grew up in South London and kind of caught the wave of Chicago house as it arrived in the city, and it very quickly became aware that there was music percolating out Detroit, which brought its own local flavour and some powerful bass lines. I mean, people like Ken Saunderson and Wen Atkins and Derek May, of course, were really well known to us as much as we knew the people from Chicago. So we knew the two things. We knew they were separate, but we kind of heard them together. And we understood some of the interplay between the two cities. And we danced it out on the dance floors of London, and then later for me in Manchester. People of my generation who grew up on the dance floor, we felt this affiliation with the cities of Chicago and Detroit. We felt like in some ways we were dancing on the same dance floors, just a little separated from each other, but doing the same things on the same wooden floors or the same concrete warehouses. And that gave us a sense of kinship.
And Emma, when you actually visited Detroit, you found kinship not just through an appreciation of the music and the dance floor, but in the architecture, in the industrial history, in some of the ways industry had left some people behind, and the creativity that stems from that. Can you talk about that bigger picture of the connection between these two places geographically?
Sure. I mean, I was so happy to be able to come to Detroit. I think it was 2018. I'd gone to Chicago, and then I decided, if I'm going to Chicago, I've got to go to Detroit. Relatively speaking, it's not that far. So I got on the train, and and took the train from one city to another and arrived and stayed with my friend Amy Cahal, aka DJ Ames. And she drove me around. And at one point I was like, Amy, stop the car. That building is the absolute double of all the buildings that we used to walk past in Manchester when we were going to dance to. Loads of Detroit techno DJs, Robert Hoods, all the people that you can imagine. We saw them DJing when they were kind of fairly at the beginning of what they were doing. And the building was the Ford Piquet building. It is almost identical to the warehouses that sat opposite the club Sankey Soap, where we listened to and danced to so much Detroit techno. And, I'm not really given to like dramatic statements like, Amy, stop the car. But I really needed her to, because I could not believe how similar the buildings were. So I got out, took some pictures, did a bit of research, and it turns out that there is a link between the architects who built the Ford Piquet building and some buildings in New England, which were themselves based on the Manchester buildings. And in a way that explained, what I remember from the time was when a lot of the DJs would come over to our club. It was called Bugged Out. It was run by the people I did a magazine with, which we did together, the magazine. They ran the club, we did the magazine together. And the DJs would often say like they felt quite at home. And I think part of that was to do with an appreciative audience who loved the music and knew all about it and was really on it, but also to do with the fact that they were driving into a space which looked very familiar. It was like quite remarkable the way the two buildings looked so similar.
I love hearing about those connections between these two different places. What do you think it is about that blue collar nature that ends up having us really create some great things and find release on the dance floor? Because that's what it seems like it is here in Detroit, the idea of working hard, playing hard, and being able to unleash that energy on the dance floor. This is another part of how we connect when we dance.
True. Well, I've two things to say about that. And one is to do with the need to dance it out. And I think the degree of like toughness that you have in your life, or the degree to which the state doesn't really operate in your favor, probably correlates quite strongly with the degree to which you need to dance it out, or the degree to which you carry with you life material, sorrows, troubles, difficulties, which benefit from being danced out. And when I say danced out, I mean the act of gathering with other people, probably having similar experiences to you, and just moving your body synchronously to music for hours at a time. You're talking about blue collar. I would probably talk about troubles, and those two things correlate over each other to some degree. But if I may say one other thing, if that's all right, which links us back to the Ford building, which is that through that building, I also found out something about the way in which dancing together can be used for the bad, for the negative, for division, because it turns out that Henry Ford was pretty keen on what he called traditional American folk dance. And he was acting in service of division there, because he was encouraging people to form communities of whiteness around what he described as traditional and kind of natural, which was about separation. And that's a very common thing, actually. The people who choose to play by the fascist playbook understand that humans respond really well to it. And part of that sometimes involves moving the large muscles of the music together, whether that's marching or whether that's, kind of aggy, instrumentalized folk dancing.
Emma, that is a perfect segue. I think we might just have to hire you as a producer on this show. Because beyond some of the things that we're talking about with your book, the abstractness in a lot of ways of how dancing can bring us together, there is a very serious focus about cultural change, social change, and ultimately political change that has come out of the dance floor. Can you talk to me a little bit about some of the examples in your book where dance is an actual force for very real change?
I think people sometimes say, why is dancing political? I can't see that. I didn't think it was political when I was dancing. And it is actually really, really hard to know why it's political when you're doing it. But you can tell it's political by the way the state responds, because the state will always try and squash culturally powerful dancing. You can see it in Italy at the moment. Italy have a new right-wing government under Giorgia Meloni. And one of her first acts of government was to bring in what she called an anti-rave law, which is essentially a law against organising dancing with your friends outside. And this has happened across time and space. In New York, you had it with the law that was repealed by the Underground Dance Network in 2017, I think. I can't remember what that law was called. You had it in Tokyo, the law affecting public morals, which basically meant like it was called the No Dancing Law. You had it in Ireland with the Public Dance Halls Act, which was brought in on the back of an anti-jazz panic in the 1930s. And you've got it now in Italy. And you know, one of the first acts of when the UK government brought in some coronavirus-based laws during the pandemic, the first use of it to criminalise somebody was for organising dancing. And outside of the rights and wrongs of organising dancing during a pandemic, you can see repeatedly that the state thinks that gathering to dance is political, and therefore that's probably signal enough that it's political. We don't need to feel it. We can see it in state action across time and space.
You make a great case that so often governments and states will use this as a way to target marginalized or oppressed groups that are finding creative ways to express themselves and ultimately become, you know, the soil for cultural change, you know, that end up influencing things way down the road. And I wonder, you know, you did such a great job writing about this, but what do you think is happening today? What is a scene that's happening today that you think you're going to be writing about in 20 years?
Oh, well, I can definitely answer that. And in a way, I'm looking forward to what other people do with this material, because I really hope that one of the things my book does is act as an instigator for a kind of closer look at the dance floor and the dancers, not based on their skill, but based on what happens when we move together to music. And I would talk about what's happening in London with the UK funky and kind of Londonizing of Amapiano. There's some amazing dance floors emerging. When people say to me sometimes, oh, like, no one dances anymore, I just think you're not going to the right places, mate. Of course it's happening. And of course, in London, in the London context, it's predominantly happening with communities of colour. And I must say, you know, I had to absolutely navigate my whiteness while I was writing almost every single line of this book. And I felt like I received a great deal of generosity from people who experienced racism, who helped build some of these foundations of UK music culture, who trusted me to collaborate with them to tell parts of the story which they held, because we're talking about precious life material. I mean, I needed the dance floor for my own reasons, but I wasn't additionally experiencing, you know, a police force as opposed to a police service. I wasn't being, over-policed and underprotected. I wasn't experiencing like random mad racism from like, you know, wherever all the time. And so I think that's an important thing to say, especially when so much of my book deals with the way in which, certainly in a UK context, and I think this is probably true elsewhere as well, so much post-war culture has been built on the dance floor that were made by either communities of colour or communities that experienced oppression through either economically or because of, you know, masses of xenophobia or whatever. But yeah, I'm really grateful. And I feel really happy to have been able to share some of this community collective learning. And yes, I did write the book, but it's not my book. And I kind of did more of a job of synthesizing lots and lots and lots of really precious life material.
That was author Emma Warren speaking about her book, Dance Your Way Home, with WDET's Ryan Patrick Hooper. You can find that conversation on WDET.org. From the WDET newsroom, Detroit Mayor Mike Duggan says the city's population is growing. He cites a new Census Bureau estimate that Detroit gained 6,800 residents over the past year, the second annual increase in a row. Michigan Congressman Sri Tanadar says he'll try to build more support in the House of Representatives before filing articles of impeachment against President Donald Trump. The Democrat says he has spoken with party leaders who urged him to back off. And inflation rose in Metro Detroit, but not by much. The Bureau of Labor Statistics says consumer prices in March and April were up 1.4% from the same period last year. The index covers the Detroit, Warren, and Dearborn area. And Governor Gretchen Whitmer is giving state elected officials more time to disclose their finances. Today would have been the deadline, but technical glitches have plagued the Secretary of State's filing website. Democratic State Senator Jeremy Moss says the new June 13th filing deadline will give lawmakers more time to file their reports. Coming up, Comic-Con is this weekend in Detroit, and as such, we'll discuss Detroit's contribution to the comic book world. You all stay right there. This is The Metro. We'll be right back.